Welcome back to the Weekly Driver podcast. My name is James Rea. I am an automotive columnist for Bay Area News Group, and I publish the website TheWeeklyDriver.com. My colleague and friend, as always, is Bruce Aldridge, and today we have on Donald Farr, who is a longtime journalist, who's written a number of books, and he has a specialty area with his new book. We're showing it on our video part of our podcast today, and it's called Boss Mustangs 50 Years. Welcome to our podcast. Donald, how are you today?
Oh, doing very good down here in sunny, warm Florida.
Ah, fantastic. I've only been to Florida once in the Clearwater area, and I remembered it was a beautiful time, and we went on a long bike ride along the Pinellas Trail. I guess it was like a rails to trails transformation. It was beautiful in the heart of the city. It was great.
Yeah, Clearwater's a beautiful area. We're about 45 minutes from there.
Gotcha. Well, Donald, could you just give us a brief overview of the reason for your newest book? You've written several, but give us a good overview of why this book now.
Well, I'll give you a little history of the book.
Please.
It's kind of turned into a long, twisted history. Back in 1982, further back than that, I had a Boss 3. I bought a Boss 302 in 1974. Bought it as a used car for $1,600.
Well, fantastic, fantastic.
Yeah. And through that, I got involved in some of the club stuff, the Shelby American Automobile Club, the Mustang Club of America, and all that, and photography as a hobby kind of combined, and I started writing for the clubs, and one thing led to another, and I was a journalist. But one thing I was always intrigued by with my Boss 302 was the history of it. Wasn't a lot written other than what you could dig up out of old hot rod magazines, Motor Trend, Road Test, those sort of things. So I didn't know a lot of the whys and wherefores of the car. So I started digging. I was able to, a lot of the guys who were involved in the creation of the car were still alive then. I got to meet and chat with Larry Shinoda, who was the designer. He did the stripes. Found a couple of engine guys, found the Mustang chief engineer at the time. So I was able to really dig into the history, and then that resulted in a book called Mustang Boss 302 that was published in 1983 for a Dobbs Publishing Group, where I was working at Mustang Monthly at the time. So that book kind of ran its course and went out of print. And then when Ford came out with the 2012 Boss 302, they wanted a launch book to go with it. And so instead of rewriting the history of the car, they knew about my old book, and they came to me to ask me if I would be interested in redoing the book, revising the book, and adding the new Boss 302 to it. So that way they kind of gave, the history and the legacy of the Boss 302 from 69-70, and the reason for it returning in 2012, along with speaking to a lot of the engineers to talk about how they created the new car. So that was the second edition of the book. And then when the 13 Boss 302 came out with a little different look and new stripes, they had me add that to the book. So there was the third revision. And Motor Books asked me last year to revise the book, add the Boss 429 to it as a 50th anniversary book. And that's the book we're talking about today. So there's been 4 versions of the book.
Great.
Now, Donald, can you tell us the name? Now, that chief, that engineer, that designer was Shinoda. He came up with the name, I believe. Tell us about that.
Yeah. He was had a very strong personality, as people who got to know him will know. But he was brought in from General Motors by Bunky Knudsen, who had been hired as Ford president. So Bunky gave him a lot of free rein, and he was a very talented designer. The stripes, the blackout graphics, the rear window slats, the rear spoiler, the front spoiler, all of that was Larry Shinoda's design. And so they were talking about a name for this new car that they wanted, that they needed to homologate the engine and other parts for Trans Am racing, and also to give Mustangs something to compete against the Camaro Z28. So they were killing two birds with one stone. And they were, I understand that one of the names on the list was Trans Am. And of course, they found out that Pontiac had already copyrighted that for a Firebird. And they were talking about SR2, which stood for Sedan Racing Group 2. And Larry just came out and say, I thought that was just a stupid name. So his nickname for Bucky Knudsen was Boss, because it was his boss. And he also knew that on the streets, the kids used the word boss for something that was cool and neat. So he put all that together and started lobbying to call the car the Boss 302, and because the cubic inches, obviously. And he won. You know, he finally convinced them that was a good name, and not only did they use it for the 302 Trans Am car, they used it for the Boss 429 that was built for homologate that engine for NASCAR.
Yes, I was interested in that, the NASCAR connection. And early Bud Moore had a race team, and he was racing it. And tell us about the NASCAR angle on that.
Well, there's actually kind of two racing angles on the two Boss Mustangs, the 302 and the 429. The first is Trans Am. Ford was very big in Trans Am. It started in '66. Mustang won '66 and '67 championships, and in '68 they had come out with a new tunnel port engine that really didn't work out for them. So they were looking for something, a new engine to go Trans Am racing with, and they found it in the form of the Cleveland heads that were coming out for 1970. So they put the Cleveland heads on the 302 Windsor block. Had to do a little adapting to make that work, and so they had a production-based engine that was cheaper to manufacture, easier to manufacture, and also homologated that engine for Trans Am. And the connection to NASCAR there, I guess, comes from Bud Moore, who was brought in from the Mercury effort of '68 to oversee two cars for Trans Am. Shelby American also had two cars in '69. So Bud Moore actually left NASCAR to go Trans Am racing in '69 and '70. On the other end of the spectrum, with the Boss 429, that engine was developed specifically for NASCAR racing. As you know, Chrysler had the Hemi, and they kind of mopped up in '67.
Yes, they
Ford
did.
Ford made a comeback in '68 with the new Fairlane and Torino's Cyclone Fastback. The aerodynamics up there, but Ford also knew that Chrysler was working on Daytonas and Charger 500s. First Charger 500s, and then later the winged Daytonas.
Yes.
So they knew they had to get more power to go with their aerodynamics, and they came up with these new hemispherical combustion chamber heads that ended up with the Boss name, and they put them on the 429 block, and they went out in '69 with the new Talladega and won the NASCAR championship that year with David Pearson.
So this was all about racing back then, '68, '69.
Yes, the Boss Mustangs were all about racing. They were both 302 and 429 were built specifically to legalize the engines for racing.
And could you tell the audience that doesn't know what homologate is?
That is...
they don't do that anymore. Is that correct?
Right. Because the race cars today don't really have much to do with production cars. But back then, they wanted to make sure that the cars and the engines and that sort of thing were actually from production cars. So in the case of the '69 Boss 302, Ford had to build 1,500 Boss 302 vehicles, and in the case of the Boss 429, they had to build 500 for NASCAR. So that's it in a nutshell. They just had to make these cars available, these engines available to the general public.
Got it.
Which gave us some really great muscle cars.
Oh, yeah.
Donald, have to profess a little ignorance here, and I didn't really do my homework as well as I should have. I haven't read the whole book, but perusing it, does the Boss Mustang have a history in cinema? A lot of other cars do, and I wondered if this particular car has appeared in movies, or does it have some celebrity other than the fact that it's a very unique car on its own right?
No, not really. I do remember there was like some B movie way back.
B movie. Yeah.
That had a Boss. I don't remember the name, but there was a Boss 302 in it, which I think later we found out it was a plain Mustang fastback, and they just put the stripes on it. But no, it doesn't really have the bullet type legacy from a movie.
No Steve McQueen driving, huh?
No Steve McQueen's.
Yeah.
No, just Parnelli Jones.
With all of your knowledge and your love affair, if you will, of Mustang, in particularly this one, you said earlier you bought a new one. A lot of people have an uncle or a cousin or a brother or a father who got them into cars. So if you wouldn't mind, what is your personal background, and did you have a family who was into cars before you were?
Not really into cars per se. Grew up in a small town, Union, South Carolina, down near Spartanburg.
Yes.
And lived out in the country. My grandparents lived across the highway, and so I was very close to my grandparents. And one day I got off the school bus in February 1966, and I looked across the highway, and there was a brand new 66 Mustang GT.
Oh boy!
I was thinking, well, who's visiting my grandparents? So I walked across, and out walks the local Ford dealer, and drives off in my grandparents' 60 Falcon 4-door. My grandfather had traded their Falcon for a brand new Mustang, a signal flare red Mustang GT, and my grandparents kind of became celebrities in the area. They were probably in their 60s at the time, and here they were driving around in a new Mustang.
Great stuff. Yeah.
I would go to town with them. I wanted to be seen in it because it was so cool to be seen in a Mustang. So that kind of gave me the impetus to follow Mustangs.
It's
Sure.
kind of like it's kind of like a guy in high school when a high school girl makes his heart skip a beat. You saw the Mustang and your heart skipped a beat. I'm sure, and you've had a long love affair. As it sure sounds that way.
And it skipped a beat enough that in early 1980s I was able to learn that my grandfather's old Mustang was for sale, and I was able to buy it, and I still own it today.
Oh
wow,
man, that's great. Do you still drive it?
Yeah, I still drive it. Just not every day, but drive it to the gym, to the grocery store, to a cruise in, that sort of thing.
Oh, that's great. And we've interviewed other people at car shows and have met several people who have iconic vehicles. What kind of reaction do you get from it? I'll relate a story that we interviewed a guy, maybe a year or so ago, who had a 1950 Ford F100 pickup truck. And he told the story of, young people not knowing what it was, and he was an older, handsome guy, and the women wanted to date him if he was single, and older guys wanted to drive it. So, with your grandfather's Mustang, what kind of reactions have you gotten from it through the years?
Well, I guess unlike an F100 pickup, even the young people know what it is. They
Yes.
know it's a Mustang, and older people generally try to guess the year.
Gotcha.
I was going home last weekend, and somebody pulled up beside me at a red light, and the older guy leaned out. That's a 65, isn't it? And I said, no, it's a 66, but you're close.
You're close. That's good.
Because you can't really tell unless you see the grill.
Gotcha.
Okay.
66, so.
Bruce?
That's interesting. I wonder, do you know, you're probably the guru of all models. Do you know what the highest selling year was of Mustangs, all Mustangs?
65.
That's what my my answer was. How about it? Here's another one. The least powerful Mustang.
That would have been in '81. They downsized the 302 to 255 cubic inches and use some kind of variable interior carburetor. I think it was only like 135 horsepower.
That's probably an excellent guess, and maybe that's the right answer. But the answer.
Well, there was a four-cylinder.
Well, I was gonna tell you a 1975 Mustang 2, 87 horsepower.
Wow. I didn't know
Yeah.
And the largest motored Mustang, you know that one.
That would be the Boss 429.
There you go.
You
wrote the book on it.
That's right.
And they put a regular, not a regular, but they put a Cobra Jet 429 in 71, so it was the same cubic inches. But the Boss 429 with those Hemi heads, it was, literally the largest, because Ford had to send the cars out to a contracted performance shop called Carcraft to fit the engines in there.
Yes.
They went to a lot of trouble to build those cars.
Yeah, could you explain a little bit? That motor does not fit in a Mustang, and they had to re-engineer the front end and suspension, right? Cut it out and redo it.
Yeah, that's correct. When they were kind of creating these two cars at the same time, and Carcraft, which did a lot of prototype specialty work for Ford, was the one who determined that, with help from Ford, that the Boss 302 could be built on the regular assembly line, so that's no problem. But the assembly line could not do what was needed to put the big Boss 429 engine in there. So Carcraft did a lot of the engineering, contrary to a lot of popular opinion or even articles that have been written, maybe even some by me in the past. People think that Carcraft actually cut the fenders out and put the new wider fenders in, inner fenders. But that's not true. Carcraft designed the inner sheet metal and shock towers and supplied them to the Dearborn assembly plant, and they actually welded them in instead of the regular pieces. And then the cars arrived at Carcraft at first with 428 Super Cobra Jet engines, and Carcraft pulled them out and put in the Boss 429. In fact, as I point out in the book, and was confirmed to me by my good friend Ed Meyer, who is the ultimate expert in Boss 429s. It was over 800 unique pieces went into making the Boss 429 from a regular Mustang.
The Weekly Driver podcast gets support from AmericanTrucks.com. Visit www.americantrucks.com.
Yes, didn't they admit that they lost money on each one of these?
Yeah, they did. They did. I don't know the details on that, but yeah, it was an expensive proposition from the, starting out with a 428 Super Cobra Jet car with all the heavy duty and 9-inch rear end and all the good stuff, and then having to send it out and pretty much have it partially taken apart and the engine put in and all the other. They had to redo the front suspension. They put on a rear sway bar. It was the first Mustang with a rear sway bar, by the way. And the first Mustang to use the 15-inch Goodyear polyglass tires.
Yeah, which are just ridiculous compared, like little nothings compared to what they have nowadays.
Oh, tell me about it. Yeah.
Donald, Bruce is the knowledgeable guy in our podcast partnership in terms of vehicles and engines and so on and so forth. And my background is more the journalism background. So I'm always curious when we talk to an author about the process of writing a book. There's just so much information to gather and to put the puzzle together. It's unlike writing a story where you have 1,000 words or 800 words, whatever it might be, and it goes pretty quickly. But with a book, what's the process for you in the books you've written through the years? Do you put 3x5 cards on a bulletin board, or do you have a special process you use for creating the?
Oh, I guess the first thing I do, just for my mind, I have to create the chapters.
Yes.
I have to divvy it up into chapters, and generally the book publisher wants that. In this case, Motor Books, they want that kind of ahead of time anyway, to kind of get an idea of what this book is going to be like. So then I tackle each chapter one at a time for the most part, and it's just the research. I have amassed quite a bit of research material in my home office. Old magazines, books, literature, factory literature, which is very helpful. today you can go on websites and research stuff. There's actually a really, really neat website out there that has all types of new car sales brochures.
Yes.
So you kind of, if you want to know what came on a Mach 1, that brochure will pretty much tell you. So that sort of thing, and then you start writing, and then the hardest part for me is always, what do I have to leave out?
Yes. Ain't that the truth? Ain't that the truth? Yes.
Especially photos. You find so many neat photos, and you just don't have room, and so you weed them out, but you still send too many, and then they weed them out. But in the end, nobody knows that you had the picture, so nobody misses it.
That was kind of my follow-up with all the great images that are in the book, and I think you make a reference to the cooperation you had from different people to get certain models and certain images, and that takes quite a bit of coordination. I'm assuming that does.
Yeah, and especially Ford in this case, because the book was Farr Ford. Yes. And one of the books came in a little gift package for everybody who bought a new 2012-2013 Boss 302. That was one of the things they wanted to do with the book. Yes. And Ford pretty much gave me carte blanche to search for photos. I went up to Dearborn and went to their new photo media area, which they've digitized a lot of the images now. And I was able to dig through to find some new stuff for the 69 70s, and had full access to photos from the 12 and 13s. So I can't thank Ford enough for that opportunity.
Sure. You've got quite a collection of period photographs of the racing history. You have a whole chapter on racing, as a matter of fact, in your book, right?
Yeah, chapter on 69 and a chapter on 70. 70 was the year that the Boss 302 won the Trans Am championship.
Taking this go ahead. I'm sorry.
And again, that was Ford. I had been to photo media back in the early '80s, digging around for Mustang Monthly, and had found some of it. But interestingly enough, the racing photos were lost at the time. The whole file cabinet was missing, they said.
Oh boy.
So subsequently they found it, and they digitized a lot of it, and I was able to add those images to the book.
This is taking the interview in a little bit of a tangent here, but as you know probably better than I do, that Ford's emphasis now away from cars, except for the Mustang, and going into, obviously they have very popular trucks and SUVs. Do you have an opinion about Ford stepping away from offering some of its other sedans? I think maybe from 2019 or 2020 on, it's going to be the Mustang and maybe the Escort or one other sedan, or one other non-truck is what I meant to say. And what are your thoughts on that area of Ford, if you have an opinion?
Well, I'm glad Mustang made the cut.
Yeah,
and,
exactly. Yes.
And another thing I like that came out of all this is Mustang is now Ford's vehicle in NASCAR.
Yes.
Which I now we've got a rear-wheel drive, front-engine, two-door car in NASCAR, like it should be. As for the other, I guess I don't understand so much because I don't know so much about the inner workings of the auto business. But I can look out on the street today and tell that the SUVs are the hot thing.
Sure.
So I'm guessing that Ford made the decision based on dropping sales for the sedans. I guess I'm gonna have to rent an SUV when I go out of town.
There you go.
These days.
Well, not to mention. Well, since you obviously have an appreciation for Ford, in your carport, in your driveway, in your wherever else, do you have another company's vehicles? Do you have a collection of vehicles?
No, I've just got the 166, and I have my wife and I travel to a lot of the Mustang Club of America shows. That's my job. My main job now is I'm the editor of the Mustang Club of America's magazine, Mustang Times, and so we go to all their national shows, which are generally 4 or 5 around the country, And whenever they're within reach, we decide, well, let's drive. Let's make a little mini vacation out of it.
Sure.
So we bought a 17 EcoBoost Mustang, partially for the gas mileage, but it's pretty peppy. And no, that's my everyday car. So
That's great.
Have you been back to the? I believe it's open. Maybe it's not open yet. The Mustang museum.
It opened last a week ago today.
Oh, okay.
It opened on the Mustang's 55th anniversary last Wednesday. I was there. It was a great event. They also tied it into an event at the Speedway. I'm sure they had over 1,000 cars attend the event. But the museum, I'm only giving them a little bit of a benefit of a doubt. They only had 10 days to prepare it after the building was completed. So
Yes.
they had some cool cars in there, including one of the Mustang convertibles that was on the Magic Skyway at the New York World's Fair in '64. So
That's
one of
good
the few
history,
that survived.
That's funny. I was in 1964. I was at the New York World's Fair, and I remember seeing that car there.
Oh man! Wow, so that's a small world.
Yeah, I was at the World's Fair in 1964. My parents took me up there, and I remember riding. And it's strange to say today, looking back, but I remember riding on the Magic Skyway, but I don't remember the Mustangs. So I don't remember what we rode in.
I remember the futuristic car, so
Yes.
I'm sure it had to be the Mustang.
Okay. Yeah, I remember the futuristic display that was
Right, yeah.
The walkway to the ride.
Donald, since you know so much, and we're about to come to the end of our time, give us something that is just so unique about a Mustang, or some great side story that you might know of a friend, or something that happened to you in a Mustang, or just something that would be a good closing point to your vast knowledge and love affair of Mustangs.
Well, one thing about the Mustang, well, a couple of things. One, I appreciate that the Mustang really hasn't changed from its original idea, Lee Iacocca's original idea, back in the early '60s of a sporty car, but 2 doors and room to hold 4 people, and a trunk to carry golf clubs or luggage, long hood, short rear deck. Most of them had the wide open grill with the running horse in it and the tri-bar tail lights. So Mustang has remained very true to its origins for the past 55 years. And just by traveling away from, let's say, the Mustang universe, and when somebody finds out what I do, everybody has a Mustang story.
That's great. Yeah.
My neighbor had one, or my girlfriend in high school drove one, or I've owned a couple, and it's kind of unique in American history, I think. That people associate with the car so well.
In a strange way, it's kind of like if you see somebody with a vintage wristwatch and you say, that's a great looking watch, and there's always a story about their father, their grandfather, their brother. They found it in a garage sale.
Yeah.
There's always a great story, and so I think that would transition into the Mustang in a roundabout way. That there's always, as you said, there's always a great story connected to somebody who has a Mustang or had a Mustang. I hadn't thought about that, but you're absolutely right. They have obviously a great legacy.
Yeah, and most of them are like that. I knew somebody who had a Mustang, but then within the Mustang world, we hear these stories. Today, it's barn finds.
Yes.
Just returned from a Mustang Club of America National Show in Houston, where a guy had a 1967 Shelby GT500 that he had found in California with 10,000 miles and owned by the same family. And
oh my gosh!
You keep thinking we're going to run out of those cars, but they keep turning up.
That's right. That's right.
Next year, Ford is touting a new model, the GT500 with 700 horsepower. What do you think of that?
Yeah. I like most Mustang people, I love it.
Oh yeah.
Actually, they're talking over 800, but they haven't
really?
released the numbers yet. Yeah.
Okay.
Going to be a spectacular car, obviously. I don't know what somebody does with that kind of horsepower, but
Yes.
as my friend Gary Patterson from Shelby American says, you can never have too much horsepower.
That's right.
Absolutely.
I guess a good closing question would be, with the numbers of books you've written, do you have on the horizon another book that you could share with us, or is it are you taking a little break?
I'm kind of in a break mode right now.
Okay.
I did 2 books year before last. One called Mustang Speed Read, and the other was a book, Ford and Mercury Muscle Cars, which was interesting for me to kind of break out of the Mustang mold and do some research into Galaxies and Talladegas and Cougars. So, but right now I'm kind of relaxing a
Great.
little bit. So.
Good for you. Well, we want to thank Donald Farr for being our guest today on the Weekly Driver podcast. We're showing his book cover on the video part of our podcast, Boss Mustang 50 Years. And Donald, it's great to just soak up your knowledge today. So thanks very much for being our guest. Really appreciate the time.
It's a great book.
Well, thank you. I feel weird when you keep talking about my knowledge, but I think that's just the result of my age.
Okay. Thank you again, sir, and we really appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of the day. Appreciate it.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Weekly Driver podcast gets support from AmericanMuscle.com, your late model Mustang and F-150 authority, bringing you the hottest products and top-notch customer service for over a decade. No one makes it easier to modify your ride. Visit AmericanMuscle.com today